On a sunny afternoon in Fort Collins, Colorado, Olivia, a highly respected attorney, sought a brief respite from her demanding schedule at a local park. Seated on a bench near a tranquil pond, she immersed herself in a thick hardcover book, relishing the peaceful atmosphere surrounded by families, joggers, and children playing. Her quiet moment was abruptly shattered by the screech of tires as a police cruiser pulled up nearby, drawing curious glances from onlookers. Two officers, Mitchell and Harper, stepped out, their expressions stern and authoritative, their eyes quickly fixed on Olivia, the only person sitting alone in the area. Approaching her with a suspicious tone, one officer called out, "Ma'am, may we speak with you for a moment?" Olivia, maintaining her composure, responded calmly, "Of course," closing her book carefully. The second officer's clipped tone revealed an underlying assumption of wrongdoing as he questioned her presence. "We got a call about some suspicious activity in the area. Mind telling us what you're doing here?" Olivia, puzzled yet poised, replied, "I'm just sitting here reading," holding up her book to illustrate her innocence. Despite her cooperation, the officers' scrutiny intensified. They demanded her ID, citing routine procedure, though their demeanor suggested otherwise. A small crowd began to gather, murmuring in discomfort at the unfolding scene. Sensing the imbalance, Olivia's pulse quickened, but she remained composed, questioning the legitimacy of their inquiries. However, her calm resistance was misinterpreted as defiance. Without warning, one officer grabbed her arm, accusing her of resisting arrest. Shocked, Olivia exclaimed, "What are you doing?" as the murmurs grew louder and a bystander began recording the incident. The cold snap of handcuffs tightened around her wrists, marking a humiliating turn from a peaceful afternoon to an unjust arrest. Despite the growing audience and visible injustice, the officers led her away, oblivious to the ripple effect their actions were about to unleash. Olivia's peaceful afternoon at the park took an unexpected and unjust turn when her calm reading session was interrupted by two police officers approaching her with suspicion. Despite doing nothing wrong, she found herself subjected to a barrage of questions that quickly escalated beyond a routine inquiry. The officers demanded to see her identification without providing a clear reason, their tone laden with assumptions rather than genuine concern. Olivia, while initially cooperative, grew increasingly aware of the unjust nature of the encounter. Her calm yet firm refusal to answer further questions without a legitimate explanation seemed to provoke the officers. Suddenly, what should have been a respectful exchange transformed into an abuse of authority. Without justification, one officer grabbed Olivia's arm, accusing her of resisting arrest, a charge entirely unfounded, as she had not moved or shown any aggression. Startled and humiliated, Olivia questioned their actions, but her words fell on deaf ears. The small crowd that had gathered murmured with growing concern. A bystander, sensing the injustice, began recording the incident on their phone. Despite the public's visible discomfort and Olivia's clear cooperation, the officers proceeded to handcuff her, leading her toward their cruiser. The snap of the cold metal cuffs biting into her wrists wasn't just physically painful, it symbolized the profound injustice she was experiencing. As she was placed in the back of the police car, Olivia's mind raced with disbelief and indignation. How had sitting in a public park with a book spiraled into such a degrading ordeal? Her years of defending clients against injustices gave her a deep understanding of the system's flaws, but experiencing them firsthand was a different, more visceral reality. Inside the cruiser, the silence was suffocating, broken only by the crackle of the police radio. She glanced out the window, catching a glimpse of the young woman still recording. A small comfort amid the humiliation. At the station, the situation worsened. Olivia endured the dehumanizing process of being fingerprinted and photographed, treated not as a respected attorney but as a criminal. The officers' smug attitudes only intensified her resolve to fight back. Though anger and frustration simmered beneath her composed exterior, Olivia knew she couldn't let this moment define her. As she sat on the cold bench of the holding cell, she began formulating her next steps. The injustice she faced wasn't just personal, it was emblematic of a larger systemic issue. What the officers didn't realize was that their attempt to silence and humiliate her had instead ignited a fierce determination to seek justice, not only for herself, but for countless others who had endured similar abuses of power. After enduring a humiliating arrest, Olivia's resolve only strengthened. Released on bail, she walked out of the station into the cool night air, her wrists still aching from the handcuffs. Her friend and colleague, Julia, was waiting by the curb, concern etched across her face. "Are you okay?" she asked. Olivia nodded but couldn't mask the exhaustion and anger simmering beneath the surface. "I'm not letting this slide," she said quietly but firmly. That night, she sat at her kitchen table surrounded by legal pads, law books, and her laptop. Every detail of the arrest replayed in her mind: the officer's dismissive tones, the weight of the crowd's stares, the sting of injustice. But instead of dwelling on humiliation, she channeled her emotions into action, drafting the foundation for a civil rights lawsuit against the officers and the police department. News of the incident spread rapidly after the video recorded at the park went viral. Strangers reached out with messages of support, sharing their own experiences of similar injustices. Community members rallied behind Olivia, seeing her fight as their own. Despite her law firm's initial hesitation, worried about potential reputational risks, Olivia stood her ground. "This isn't just about me," she told them. "It's about standing up to systemic abuse." Her unwavering determination inspired colleagues and community members alike. Olivia attended town halls and community forums, listening to stories from others who had been mistreated or silenced. The solidarity she encountered was both heartening and sobering. So many voices with stories that often went unheard. Each account reinforced her commitment. She wasn't fighting solely for personal vindication, but to expose a system that too often failed the very people it was meant to protect. Yet, even with community support and legal preparation underway, Olivia could not have anticipated the next twist. During a late-night review of her case, her attorney called with news that left her momentarily speechless. She had been assigned as the presiding judge for an internal misconduct hearing involving officers Mitchell and Harper, the same officers she was suing. The irony was staggering. For a moment, Olivia grappled with the gravity of the situation. Could she remain impartial? Could she set aside her personal experience to uphold judicial fairness? Taking a deep breath, she reminded herself of her purpose. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability, integrity, and ensuring justice prevailed. Fate had placed her in a position to embody the very principles she was fighting for. Olivia knew this was not just a coincidence. It was an opportunity to demonstrate what real justice looked like, both for herself and for everyone watching. The viral video of Olivia's arrest ignited widespread outrage, sparking conversations about police misconduct and systemic injustice. Across Fort Collins and beyond, people from diverse backgrounds voiced their support, flooding social media with messages demanding accountability. News outlets reached out for interviews, eager to cover the unfolding story, but Olivia declined media attention. Her focus was unwavering. This wasn't about personal fame. It was about justice. Attending community meetings, she listened to countless stories of others who had experienced similar mistreatment, each account reinforcing her resolve. For many, Olivia became a symbol of resilience, someone willing to challenge a flawed system. Her law firm initially hesitated, concerned that her public battle might overshadow their carefully built reputation. But Olivia stood her ground, calmly explaining that fighting for justice wasn't just professional, it was personal and necessary. "This isn't about headlines," she told her colleagues. "It's about setting a precedent so no one else has to go through what I did." Inspired by her determination, several colleagues offered to assist, forming a dedicated legal team committed to the cause. While preparing her civil rights lawsuit, Olivia received unexpected news. She had been assigned as the presiding judge over an internal misconduct hearing involving officers Mitchell and Harper, the very officers who had wrongfully arrested her. The irony was striking. As she sat in her office processing the information, she pondered the implications. Could she maintain impartiality? Could she deliver justice without letting personal experience cloud her judgment? After a moment of reflection, she decided that fairness and integrity must guide her actions. This wasn't about revenge. It was about upholding the principles she believed in. The day of the hearing arrived and the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Word of the twist had spread, drawing a crowd larger than usual for an internal misconduct case. Reporters lined the back of the room, pens poised. Officers Mitchell and Harper sat stiffly at the defense table, their confidence visibly shaken when Olivia entered in her black judicial robe. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on anyone. Despite the tension, Olivia's demeanor remained composed and professional. Her gaze was steady as she began the proceedings. Throughout the hearing, she listened attentively to both sides, ensuring fairness despite the personal history involved. Evidence mounted against the officers, painting a clear picture of misconduct. By the day's end, it was evident the case was more than a disciplinary matter. It was about the broader issue of unchecked authority. Olivia's role wasn't just to rule on the facts, but to affirm that justice, no matter how complex, must prevail. The courtroom was filled with a palpable sense of anticipation as the misconduct hearing for officers Mitchell and Harper began. News of the unexpected twist that the judge presiding over the case was Olivia, the very woman they had wrongfully arrested, had spread throughout the community, drawing a large crowd. Some attendees sought justice, others came out of curiosity. But for Olivia, seated at the bench in her black robe, this was about something far greater than personal vindication. Her expression was calm and resolute, embodying the impartiality her role demanded. Yet beneath her composed exterior, she couldn't ignore the profound irony of the moment. Officers Mitchell and Harper sat at the defense table, visibly unsettled. Mitchell's face had drained of color when Olivia entered, while Harper shifted uncomfortably in his seat. For them, this was a routine internal hearing, until they realized the judge was the very person they had humiliated. Still, Olivia made it clear through her demeanor that this wasn't about revenge. Her duty was to uphold justice, to ensure the proceedings were fair, no matter the personal history. As the attorneys delivered their opening statements, Olivia listened intently, her pen moving methodically across her notepad. The prosecutor laid out a compelling case, presenting evidence of excessive force used by the officers during an unrelated incident. Witnesses recounted harrowing experiences, painting a picture of recklessness and a troubling pattern of misconduct. Olivia's gaze occasionally flickered toward the defendants, noting their fidgeting hands and averted eyes. The weight of the accusations, coupled with the undeniable evidence, began to sink in. Mitchell, once defensive, now appeared regretful, stealing glances at Olivia as if silently acknowledging his mistakes. When it was the defense's turn, their arguments felt strained. The attorney attempted to justify the officer's actions, citing high-pressure circumstances and split-second decisions. Yet the explanations rang hollow against the backdrop of clear violations of protocol. Olivia maintained her professionalism, asking pointed questions that cut through the defense's deflections without betraying personal bias. Throughout the proceedings, the community's presence loomed large. Many had come to see justice served, and Olivia understood the responsibility she carried, not just as a judge, but as a symbol of accountability. The hearing concluded with closing arguments, the prosecutor urging the court to set a precedent against abuse of power. As Olivia adjourned the session, she felt the weight of every gaze in the room. This wasn't just about two officers, it was about a system that needed change. Her role, she realized, was to ensure that change started here, with truth, accountability, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. As the misconduct hearing for officers Mitchell and Harper progressed, the weight of the courtroom's atmosphere grew heavier. Olivia sat at the bench, maintaining a composed and professional demeanor even as she faced the two officers responsible for her wrongful arrest. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone, least of all the officers themselves. Mitchell and Harper shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, their earlier confidence eroding with each piece of damning evidence presented against them. Yet Olivia knew this wasn't about personal retribution. Her responsibility as a judge was clear, to uphold justice fairly and impartially. The hearing brought to light troubling details of the officers' pattern of misconduct. Witnesses described incidents of excessive force and unnecessary aggression, reinforcing the prosecutor's argument that Mitchell and Harper had repeatedly abused their authority. One victim, a young man named Ethan, testified with a voice trembling yet resolute. "They didn't give me a chance to explain," he said, recalling a routine traffic stop that had spiraled into an unwarranted use of force. His words echoed Olivia's own experience, a stark reminder of the broader issue at hand. When it came time for the officers to testify, the tension in the room peaked. Mitchell took the stand first, his previous bravado replaced by visible discomfort. Under the prosecutor's questioning, he admitted, "Looking back, I could have handled things differently." It was a small concession, but one that carried weight. Harper, however, remained defensive, his justifications growing increasingly hollow under scrutiny. Olivia listened attentively, her face revealing no emotion, though inside she felt a mixture of frustration and empathy. Frustration at the systemic flaws that allowed such behavior to persist, and empathy for the complexity of confronting one's own wrongdoing. As the hearing neared its conclusion, both attorneys delivered their closing arguments. The prosecutor emphasized the need for accountability, urging the court to send a clear message that abuse of power would not be tolerated. The defense, struggling to mitigate the damage, appealed for leniency, citing the officers' years of service. Olivia took it all in, weighing the evidence carefully. Her decision had to balance fairness with the imperative of upholding public trust. When she finally delivered her ruling, the courtroom was silent. "The role of law enforcement is to protect and serve with integrity," she began, her voice steady. When that trust is broken, there must be consequences. The officers were suspended without pay, required to undergo extensive retraining, and issued formal disciplinary records. Mitchell quietly whispered, "I'm sorry," as he left the courtroom, a gesture that, while not erasing the harm done, acknowledged the gravity of their actions. For Olivia, justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about ensuring systemic change and reaffirming the community's faith in accountability. The courtroom was packed as the day of the ruling arrived, the air thick with anticipation. Community members, journalists, and legal observers filled every seat, their gazes fixed on the bench where Olivia sat in her black judicial robe. Her expression was calm and resolute, embodying both the weight of responsibility and the unwavering commitment to fairness. The irony of the moment was palpable. Just weeks earlier, she had been the one unjustly handcuffed by officers Mitchell and Harper. Now she held the power to deliver justice, not just for herself, but for a community long yearning for accountability. Olivia's voice was steady as she began her ruling. Law enforcement officers are entrusted with immense responsibility. When that trust is violated, the consequences ripple far beyond a single incident, she stated, her gaze briefly meeting Mitchell's. He sat with his head bowed, visibly affected by the gravity of the moment, while Harper fidgeted, his earlier defensiveness giving way to uneasy silence. Olivia recounted the overwhelming evidence presented during the hearing, testimonies of excessive force, violations of protocol, and a clear pattern of misconduct. The evidence demonstrates that officers Mitchell and Harper acted with unnecessary force, disregarding the standards they swore to uphold, she concluded. Her decision was firm yet balanced. The officers were suspended without pay, required to complete extensive retraining, and issued formal disciplinary records that would follow them throughout their careers. As the courtroom absorbed the ruling, a collective exhale seemed to pass through the crowd, a mixture of relief and vindication. Mitchell glanced at Olivia as he stood to leave. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Olivia gave a slight nod, acknowledging the apology but offering no absolution. As people filed out, some approached Olivia with quiet gratitude, thanking her for standing firm. She remained focused, aware that this ruling was a step toward accountability, but not the end of the journey. Justice, she knew, was a continuous process, one that demanded vigilance, integrity, and unwavering courage. A week after the tense misconduct hearing, the courtroom was filled with palpable anticipation as Olivia prepared to deliver her final ruling. Every seat was occupied, community members seeking justice, reporters ready to capture every word, and legal observers witnessing what had become more than just an internal disciplinary case. To many, this was a pivotal moment for accountability in law enforcement. Olivia, seated at the bench in her black robe, exuded calm authority. Despite the personal history with officers Mitchell and Harper, she remained focused on her duty to ensure justice was served impartially and fairly. The role of law enforcement is to protect and serve the community with integrity, fairness, and respect, Olivia began, her voice resonating throughout the silent courtroom. When that trust is broken, it causes harm far beyond the immediate victims. Her gaze moved briefly to the officers seated at the defense table. Mitchell sat with his head lowered, shoulders tense, while Harper shifted uncomfortably, his earlier defiance replaced with unease. Olivier continued detailing the evidence presented: multiple accounts of excessive force, disregard for proper procedures, and a disturbing pattern of misconduct. The officers' actions were not isolated lapses in judgment, she stated. They reflect a broader issue, an erosion of the public trust that cannot be ignored. Pausing, she allowed her words to settle over the room. While the court recognizes the challenges law enforcement officers face, those challenges do not excuse the violation of constitutional rights or the abuse of authority. Her decision was measured but firm. Both officers were to be suspended without pay, required to undergo comprehensive retraining on de-escalation and community relations, and issued formal disciplinary records that would follow them in their careers. As murmurs rippled through the courtroom, Mitchell glanced up. His face, previously guarded, now revealed a mixture of regret and resignation. Rising from his seat, he hesitated before softly uttering, "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, sincere but unable to undo the harm caused. Olivia gave a slight nod, acknowledging the apology without offering immediate forgiveness. Real change, she knew, came from actions, not just words. Outside the courtroom, reporters clamored for comments, but Olivia declined, focusing instead on the community members who quietly approached to thank her. "You gave us hope," an older woman said, gripping her hand. Olivia offered a warm but restrained smile. "This is just one step," she replied. "There's still more work to do." The case's impact extended beyond Fort Collins, sparking statewide conversations about police accountability and reform. Olivia used her platform to advocate for transparency and systemic changes, participating in public forums and collaborating with local leaders to push for meaningful policies. Standing on the courthouse steps later that afternoon, she watched a group of young activists gather peacefully, holding signs that read "Justice for All" and "Accountability Now." Olivia felt a deep sense of purpose. Justice wasn't just about one ruling, it was about paving the way for a more equitable future. And for the first time since that fateful day in the park, she felt hope that real change was possible. The story of Olivia's journey delivers profound lessons about justice, resilience, and the importance of standing up for what is right. One of the most significant messages is the value of integrity, even when faced with personal injustice. Olivia chose not to seek revenge but to pursue accountability through the proper legal channels, demonstrating that true strength lies in remaining composed and principled. Her experience reminds us that speaking out against wrongdoing, even when it is uncomfortable or difficult, can spark meaningful change. Another important lesson is the power of community support. When people unite to address injustice, their collective voices can drive reform and inspire hope. Olivia's story also emphasizes that accountability is essential in rebuilding trust, especially with those entrusted to serve and protect. For older audiences, it reinforces the timeless truth that fairness, respect, and empathy must guide our actions, regardless of the circumstances. In life, there will be moments when we witness or experience unfair treatment. This story encourages us to act with dignity, seek justice through peaceful means, and never underestimate the impact of standing up for ourselves and others. Change may be slow, but with courage and perseverance, it is possible to create a more just and compassionate world.